Welcome to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. Here's your host, Alex Klausner and Bobby Carney.
Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show, where Dynasty never sleeps. We are today on the Sunday Big Show. We are reviewing all of the action from Sunday's games, including a little Friday night action we got in a bonus game in Brazil. Now, one of the funny things I think about that Brazil game is how much was made of the player's safety off the field in Brazil, and then really the biggest danger to any player was the actual field that they had in Brazil. I think that put the players at more risk than anything. If you are like me and you watched week one, and you may have seen that your teams perhaps underperformed in week one. I had a pretty rough go of things. Now, this is always an interesting conversation, and so we're going to start off a little bit today with me talking to my man, Bobby, over here. I am Alex, one of your hosts. We are going to be talking a little bit about week one and how you react to taking an L right off the bat like that. So, Bobby, take me through your process. How do you respond when you get handed a tough loss off the bat in a dynasty league?
We always discuss how week one is kind of its own thing, and try not to overreact. But you have to have some form of a reaction and some form of trying to figure out, all right, how to right the ship. So the first thing I try to hyper focus on is actually probably my second year players, because you have a season of tape on them. You kind of know what you're getting at. You know what you had your rookie season with them. So you're actually trying to see in their second year, are they going to elevate? Are they going to take the next step? Or, if you had a rookie that had a quiet rookie season, all right, now we're trying to see that next step into actually becoming a regular in the NFL. So I feel like if you're sitting there and you're starting to see some year two guys that are still not performing, we'll talk about a couple of them a little bit later on, that are still not performing even in week one, that's where I might start sounding the alarm, because you want to start trading them off their team sooner rather than later. Then after that, I would probably go to the rookies. We've seen a lot of preseason. We've kind of seen what they can do a little bit, but we only have such a small sample size. But there's things that you could still be concerned about. And then, if you've got a veteran that is in a new situation, then it's like, all right, how's that new situation going? Like Deontay Johnson in Carolina. There's probably a lot of people that are not happy with he could have snaked a wide receiver one job there, and I don't think anybody is happy with any Carolina asset right now. So that's kind of how I would prioritize and look at those right now.
Sure. One of the things that I think that you hit on that I think is a really good talking point too is this idea of the regular season really being different from the preseason. I think we saw there were definitely some rookies that noticed there is a big difference between how they were able to perform in the preseason and the regular season. I got to see one of those in person yesterday. We'll talk about him a little bit later. But I think really the thing you got to focus on is how defensive coordinators are attacking offenses, right? In week one, especially, there's such a big difference in how a defensive coordinator is able to prepare for that game. There's a lot more lead in that they have to that regular season game. Whereas in week two, they were only preparing for that team for a week. Week three, only a week. Week four, only a week. But that week one opponent, they have a lot more lead in. So there's a lot more ways that a defense is going to be able to be aware of an offense's weaknesses, be able to cover certain players, be able to shut down certain aspects of an offense, because there's that much more prep time. So I think the defenses are much more at an advantage when it comes to taking out the lead players of an offense. And I think we saw that really materialize a lot over the course of week one. And then the other thing is the difference between the actual types of plays that the defensive coordinators are calling. They're not going to be running disguise blitzes and things like that or advanced defensive concepts in the preseason, but in the regular season, they are, right? Because that's when the games matter. So rookie quarterbacks, rookies, just in general, are going to be going up against things they really haven't been thrown before. And perhaps, as we'll see, kind of get thrown for a loop. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity to also piggyback off of another thing that you said to kind of get us into our Friday's game, right? Which is the second year player and their progression, as well as the veteran in a new situation. So you mentioned that we've got a second year player who is a standout, Jaden Reed, who had 170 plus combined yards, as well as 2 touchdowns. And then you had Saquon Barkley, that veteran in the new situation, absolutely shined. 130 plus yards, 3 touchdowns. We even had Josh Jacobs, a veteran walking into a new situation, have a decent game for himself as the lead dog in Green Bay. So why don't you take us through those players, in particular, Jaden Reed and Saquon, and their performances, and kind of how that's changing your opinion of where they went into this game.
Yeah, I just want to first speak. I want to give my condolences to all the New York Giants fans that are listening to this. And that Friday game had to be so hard to watch. It had to be absolutely hard to watch. Just Saquon. Like, at first, when he did that first, like, loss of 5-yard slip, I'm like, okay, maybe the New York Giants fans are going to have a little bit of a laugh in this one. And then he just went off. And that was rookie Saquon. That was how he used to look when I had him. Like, it was a really good game for him. Jaden Reed also, like, just that, like, top tier speed. Like, when he got going, no one could catch him. No one could catch him. You're not going to get a hand on him. It was really impressive seeing that top end speed. And then also, like, with that end around play that got him his first touchdown, I'm pretty sure. Like, they understand when we can get him to that top level speed that he can't be caught. So they're trying to find ways to script him into situations like that. How can we get him going at top speed with the ball? Like, if we can't throw him the ball, we need to have ways to script him to get to that speed. So those were definitely, like, interesting points of I've seen from those two guys. They had really good games. In my opinion, like, stuff that's sustainable, stuff that you want to see. But yeah, it was definitely really good performances from those two. Just it'll be interesting to see from future with Jaden Reed. Now that we kind of know that Jordan Love's could be out for a little bit, how much is Malik Willis going to be able to keep that production sustainable? Or are we going to see more scripted stuff for Jaden Reed to try to keep him sustainable?
I will chime in a little bit on the Malik Willis topic.
Yes.
We saw, as Bobby mentioned, there was an injury to Jordan Love, devastatingly, right at the end of the game. We see him suffer this knee injury. Fortunately, it looks like he avoided a major injury, and he'll only be out for a very short period of time. But as somebody who is kind of a hybrid Titans and Bears fan at this point, which was an interesting experience yesterday, I can tell you that Malik Willis is a guy who has really struggled to make the jump from college to the NFL. A lot of the concerns that you had about Malik Willis coming in as a prospect, about accuracy, decision making, just a lot of the, I guess you would say, typical problems that you see with kind of his player archetype, right? As like kind of the scrambling playmaking quarterback, typically making all those off-platform throws, typically struggles to make like the rhythm throws, right? If you're an improviser, it's not as easy to play in the rhythm game. And that's where I see a real problem for the Green Bay receivers as Malik Willis is going to be your quarterback is that's kind of one of the things that the Green Bay offense will demand of you. Now, have we seen Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers be able to have great success on improvised plays? Sure. But that's not the basis of their game or the basis of their success when they're behind center. And I think that the only way that we've really ever seen Malik Willis have success as a quarterback is as a rusher. So I certainly would not be expecting Jaden Reed to be so productive as long as Jordan Love is out of the game. But when Jordan Love comes back, I am definitely going to be, sky's the limit for this guy. And he really looks like the guy who's going to emerge as really the top target in this kind of crowded and murky receiver room that Green Bay has. Jordan Love suffered that injury, right?
Yeah.
So you might be looking for somebody on the waiver wire. And that's going to kind of take us to our next game, in which we saw the Minnesota Vikings absolutely handle the New York Giants. And one of the guys who was a star in this game was a guy that I'm going to take a little victory lap around. You haven't heard me say this on this podcast, but one thing that I have been saying is that fantasy football is different than real life. And in fantasy football, when Sam Darnold is behind center for one of the most pass-happy offenses in America, when Sam Darnold has Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison as weapons to throw to, this guy can produce some fantasy points for you. And I think we saw him kind of acquit himself in that way yesterday. Conversely, we saw Daniel Jones, a quarterback that a lot of people expected to struggle, really struggle. So, Bobby, why don't you break down the performance of those quarterbacks today and kind of how that's going to affect their dynasty value? Is Sam Darnold somebody that you're pursuing in your leagues? And what situation do you have to be in to get Sam?
Something I definitely want to mention as we start getting into all these games. This week, we had 8 quarterbacks have 0 passing touchdowns, and then 11 have 1. So there's a lot of frustrated owners out there with their quarterback play right now. So you're going to see some people get a little antsy, wanting to move and stuff. And I do think Sam might be one of those guys of, if you need someone and someone has him, you can get him easily for cheap, because they're going to sit there and go, oh my God, I can actually get something out of Sam Darnold right now, because this is a rental. This is a hands down rental. Sam Darnold's not going to be there for long. They have JJ McCarthy. This is a 1-year rental to get you by. So it should not take you that much to get him, but you never know. Maybe that person is on. Maybe the guy that has Sam Darnold also has Jordan Love and is going to be hanging on to him because this is why I have Sam Darnold.
Could be. I mean, 19 of 24, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. I mean, it wasn't like a great day.
Yeah, it
by
wasn't
any stretch.
Awesome.
No, of course not. But I mean, he outproduced a lot of bigger names. And if you're in a super flex league or you're in a single quarterback league and you've got an injury to cover, Sam Darnold is a guy that I'd be looking to target, because we know that Kevin O'Connell, that former quarterback, that Sean McVay guy, I mean, he had Kirk Cousins tearing up the NFL in terms of stats. And when it comes to fantasy football, it's about stats, and this offense can generate that. Now, speaking of stats, a guy who didn't produce that, Daniel Jones. If you, even in a super flex league, are you putting him out there?
He is a permanent sit. I mean, it's one of those things of can it get worse? And it finds a way to get worse. I mean, all this prep time and 22 of 42, 186, 2 picks. There's times where it's we're going to have some guys later that have picks, and it's oh, that's just young quarterback play. Oh, that's just a great play by the defense. A lot of his Daniel Jones stuff is just bad. It is just bad football. So it's one of those things, even in a super flex, that is just if you need a warm body to fill that spot, like, then I guess Daniel Jones, but it's getting really bad there in New York. And like I said, condolences for all the people that, because he is the reason you don't have Saquon. Like, they paid him all this money. He is the reason you do not have Saquon. And now you have to play Saquon twice a year now. And then you get to keep watching Daniel Jones.
Right. I mean, it is. I mean, they did say it on Hard Knocks, right? It's like, we didn't pay Daniel Jones $45 million to hand the ball off. So they've got, but there is an aspect of volume, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you do maximize your chances to score when you have volume. We did see passing volume from Daniel Jones in the form of the 42 attempts. There are obviously, one of Daniel Jones's saving graces is that he can run the football. And there are ways in which we've seen, like top end quarterback finishes because of the rushing upside that he provides. So, I mean, is there still a chance that maybe he can produce some fantasy value based on that?
He's got to limit the turnovers. He has to limit the turnovers, because if you're getting no touchdowns and then you're getting a -4 or -6 thrown on top of everything you're doing, like, that's the problem. Is like that's the stuff that translates from real football and fantasy, is turnovers. Now, if he can stop turning the ball over and like maybe get a touchdown or two, then you're back to like, okay, he's serviceable. But yeah, it's the multiple turnovers, like lackluster yards, no touchdowns. It's all that.
So speaking of turnovers, we're now going to turn this one over to a game that I had the great pleasure of attending in person yesterday, which was the professional debut of one Caleb Williams for the Chicago Bears. What an atmosphere that was. The stadium was rocking. I have been to a couple Bears games there, but I have not seen Soldier Field quite like that. The energy there was crazy. And when Caleb Williams came out and had the kind of game that he did, the energy turned a little different. Caleb Williams really struggled yesterday, and I could see it in person. He was, I'm just going to say it, not good. He was not good. He really hurt his team with a lot of really poor throws. He's really struggled with his accuracy, and that was something that was going to be a concern coming in with Caleb Williams. And when you go through kind of this offseason that they had, all of the buildup, all of the hype, all of the hope that I think that Caleb instilled, and I think that there just are a lot of questions about that performance and how much he struggled and why he struggled as much as he did, given as well as he did in the preseason, et cetera, et cetera. But the real story, I think, of that game was the Titans' collapse and the turnovers that they had. And like, they lost that game, right? I mean, we're talking about Caleb Williams and how poorly he did. But let's not excuse Will Levis and some of just the awful turnovers you saw from him yesterday. He's a guy whose dynasty value, I think, was really kind of teetering in the balance, right? Where if he came out and he had a great season under new head coach Brian Callahan with DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley and Treylon Burks and all of these weapons now that they're trying to surround him with, I thought he could actually really skyrocket in value and be a guy that like really comes in. However, with that kind of game, do you think we maybe see the team turn to Mason Rudolph sooner than later?
I'm not sure. The major thing that I would keep when keeping Will Levis in your mind is he is a second year quarterback, but he's not really a second year quarterback. He came in halfway. Do you know on top of your head the when he came in for the Titans? It was definitely halfway.
Week 7 for Atlanta. And then we also have to consider he is going into year one of a new system. They had a
Yeah.
coaching change in which they got rid of Mike Vrabel and then they brought in more of a quarterback friendly coach. But we did not see the quarterback friendliness really pay off for them in the second half. They couldn't even move the football.
Yeah. So that's a lot of like where I would go with Will Levis. Is he's still young. He still needs to get a full season under his belt. Um, a performance like that from Caleb Williams is to be expected. He's a rookie starting week one on a team that's like, obviously they're not as bad as what a number one overall pick team should be. They got like, there's a reason they have that pick, and it's from a great trade that they had last year. But what I'm saying is there's definitely room to improve for all the quarterbacks. They have the stuff around them. It's just trying to find easy ways to do that. And I think the number one thing that helps Will Levis is going to be having Tony Pollard, who's not this one-dimensional running back. It's not a guy like when he had Derrick Henry. When Derrick Henry's on the field, you knew where the ball was going. When Derrick Henry's off the field, you knew where the ball was going. It was that's the give and take of having a great running back like Derrick Henry that is one-dimensional, is it makes your offense one-dimensional. It makes it very easy to read, easy to script around. So him having Tony Pollard might really help have a little bit easier defenses to work with, but he just needs to get a little bit extra reps in him.
The one thing that I will say, though, that you got to watch out for is the fact that Brian Callahan did not draft this guy, right? Brian Callahan did not go to the NFL draft and select Will Levis as his quarterback. That was a guy that was there when he took the job. And oftentimes in football, you see head coaches say, I'm going down with the guy that I pick. Whether or not, they picked him, that's I think a big reason why you saw Justin Fields get kind of treated the way he did in Chicago, because Eberflus is more on the hot seat and he wants the opportunity. Okay, if I'm going down, then I want the quarterback that I had a hand in drafting and I selected to be my guy. And Caleb Williams is going to be that guy. Now, passing back to Caleb, one thing that I did see that was a real positive when I was watching that game is that when you saw Caleb make decisions on the field, they were the right decisions, right? It's like, okay, there were 2 touchdowns in particular that he could have had on like these wheel routes that were kind of schemed open by the coach. And Caleb just missed the throws. These long balls, he just sailed over the heads of Keenan Allen and then DeAndre Carter later in the game. Those 2 could have had touchdowns from Caleb, but he missed the throws. But they were the right reads. Those were definitely the guys you wanted to be going to on those plays. Those guys were open for touchdowns. Caleb just has to hit them. So from a decision-making standpoint, you like what you're seeing from Caleb, but from an execution standpoint, you don't. And that's what's got to get cleaned up. But also at the same time, I think you can see that cleanup. So I'm a little more optimistic about Caleb's outlook, even though he struggled in this game to actually like really execute. And there were definitely times where it's like, man, he looks like a lost rookie out there for sure. But there are reasons for optimism. Whereas I think with Will Levis, I think you're leaving that game a lot more pessimistic about his outlook. Speaking of quarterbacks whose outlook we want to be pessimistic about, and second-year quarterbacks who you're probably hitting smash that panic button on, we're going to talk about Bryce Young, the guy who got the Bears, Caleb Williams, when Carolina decided to make that deal to trade all that draft capital and DJ Moore, unfortunately. They traded up for that, and now they are stuck with him. They got blown out by the New Orleans Saints. 40. What was the score of that game? 47-10.
It was bad.
It was brutal. And so what we want to do is kind of break down some of the things that happened in that game. Now, one of the things that we saw was Bryce Young obviously be terrible, right? I think he was 13 of 30 for 161, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. And then we saw his counterpart, Derek Carr, who the much maligned Saints quarterback Derek Carr had a great day, finished as one of the top quarterbacks in fantasy football with 19 of 23, 200 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But I think the story of this game isn't just like, oh my God, we're hitting the panic button on Bryce Young. There's another guy in this game who you probably paid a lot for to get this offseason if you acquired him or you drafted him high in your rookie draft or you drafted him high in your startup, and that is wide receiver Chris Olave, who had an absolutely nowhere game in a really big day for the Saints. So let's break down this Olave performance, which was really confusing, I think, for a lot of owners for him.
Yeah, I think the thing you have to worry about with this performance is when you have a situation of Derek Carr having a really good passing game and just he's not there. Like you'd think at some point, like he just like, oh, we just lucked into getting him. He was open on this one play, like at least something. And that was like what was really worrisome. Or even like, okay, Shaheed might be the wide receiver 1 in this offense, something like that. Well, once it was getting into the 30s to 3 and all this, once the score was getting out of hand, it's like, well, maybe we might sit Shaheed and let Olave hasn't gotten a lot of touches. Let's keep Olave in the game for a little longer. And it's like that still was not there. So you have to be looking at where is this going from there? Is this going to be a situation of like, hey, we were losing games when we force-fed Olave, but now we're not losing games because of that. So that's something that you need to look into. As for Carolina, I mean, just I don't know what to do with Bryce Young. Like as an owner, I mean, you can try trading him now. I at least was lucky and I traded him in the offseason. I kind of saw a little bit of a writing on the wall with Dave Canales and him of like, I know I'm checking out really early after one season, but if I don't check out now and he fails, he's going to be worth nothing. And I think people that held on to Bryce Young a little longer are feeling that right now, that he is worth nothing. And there are already talks that this could be it for Bryce Young. It's crazy that a number 1 overall pick like that, 13 of 30, 161, 2 touchdowns. Like, okay, if he's a struggling quarterback, at least get a run game to kind of settle him in. Like, no runners had more than 6 carries or over 25 yards. You're not even having a run game to help him out. Now I know the script didn't help, but again, this goes back to a little bit of Dave Canales as the head coach. He couldn't get a run game going in Tampa. So if he can't get a run, he's not going to get a run game. He can't get a run game going over there either. It's just going to make things worse for Bryce Young. So it's going to be a really, really long season for Carolina and Carolina fantasy owners. And like for me, like that was a thing I worried about with my rookie draft this year is a lot of Carolina rookies were falling to me in these picks. And I'm like, this guy's like a first round rookie talent. I got to pick him with like Xavier Legette. And now it's like, great. Now I have Xavier Legette, Jonathan Mingo, Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks didn't play this game, and they're going to have to hope that he can come back and give some relevance. But I have 3 to 4 Carolina players on my team right now, and I am really scared of what I'm going to be doing with them.
You know, I think you mentioned Jonathan Brooks. I do think, part of the run game factor is that they're leaning on a lot of guys that really aren't the guy they're meant to be leaning on, which is Jonathan Brooks, who's currently injured. And when he comes back, maybe that does give their run game a shot in the arm and kind of do some of the things for this offense that they hope it would. I guess you're really hoping that maybe some of those, we have to throw to somebody targets are going to.
You'll get some garbage
Legette,
time from him.
Right. Yeah. And we did see Legette actually get some love from the passing game and get something going. So I do think that there's some juice to squeeze there, but I'm definitely avoiding any Carolina investment probably for the foreseeable future, because part of it is like ownership. It really does start at the top a lot of the time. And one of the things that we are really seeing is that Dave Tepper is a terrible NFL owner. And a lot of the decisions that he makes are the wrong ones. He's the guy apparently who pushed for Bryce Young over CJ Stroud when the coaching staff apparently wanted Stroud. He's the guy who hired Frank Reich and then fired him 5 games into the season or something insane like that, right? It's like there's clearly a lot of Bryce Young buyer's remorse, and I think a lot of it is being taken out on just the coaches and things like that and general managers but really it's Tepper. Tepper is the problem, but he's not going to fire himself. And so with your Carolina, you're kind of stuck with that, and that's kind of your organization, and good luck. We have to now talk about another receiver who had a very similar game to Chris Olave, and that was wide receiver Drake London for the Atlanta Falcons. If you are the London owner, you have been sitting there waiting for this breakout from him, right? You drafted him thinking, okay, this is going to be the guy in Atlanta. He's going to be the target hog. And then you got quarterback years from Desmond Ridder. And that was definitely not serving Drake London at all. But he's been this like, the metrics are good. The advanced analytics are good. He's beating all these guys on the routes. The quarterbacks just aren't looking his way. Wait till the quarterback comes in. Wait till the quarterback comes in. And it's going to be Drake London's season. And the quarterback has arrived in the form of Kirk Cousins, who has given great wide receiver seasons to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. We've seen him succeed in Washington. We've seen Kirk Cousins deliver the ball to productive receivers and create production. Well, that did not happen for Drake London, who's whopping 2 receptions for 15 yards on 3 targets probably has you feeling like this is not working out.
If another couple map performances, and this is what everybody was discussing when it happened, was if Kirk Cousins has a couple more of these map performances, how long do you keep Michael Penix on the sideline? They spent a first round pick on him. And it brings into this situation of you're paying this starting quarterback all this money, but then you have a first round pick sitting behind him. Like you've set yourself up for just pressure and issues that you didn't need to set yourself up for. And That's going to be interesting to see if Kirk Cousins keeps doing this. When does the panic button get pushed and Michael Penix goes in?
Well, I think that's a great point. And I mean, if you're the Michael Penix owner, you probably are sitting there watching this game going, all right, things are looking good for my guy. In fact, I think one of my friends made a great observation yesterday, which is Michael Penix may have had the best day of any rookie quarterback without even taking a snap. Right. I do think though that there is an aspect to Drake London where, and while I definitely am at least starting to send out some feelers on trading him, I do think that there's a hold for 1 or 2 more weeks kind of thing. Because as we said, week 1 is a week where the defensive coordinators have just that much more time to prepare and take out your top weapons. We saw that happen to great players. Amon-Ra St. Brown was not that productive, right? We saw that happen to like Jamar Chase didn't have that great of a day. Although there are more reasons for that, and we'll get to them in a bit, right? But Marvin Harrison Jr. was a really big disappointment. We'll talk about him later, right? There's a lot of guys on that top end, Puka Nacua, right? Who just did not have great days. So it's possible that Drake London is just kind of like in that category, like along with Chris Olave, where they're just getting factored out of the game by great coverage and great schemes. But with the fact that we have not seen Drake London really do that yet and prove it, it is getting to be a bit of a concern. Now, speaking about like a lack of work or whatever, we're going to also now get into the running backs in this game who got a ton of work. Now, if you're the Bijan Robinson owner, you are loving this, right? Pittsburgh with Najee Harris, you're sitting there going, okay, we won the game. We got 18-10. Justin Fields, Najee Harris were able to control the ball on the ground, and Najee got a lot of work. 20 carries. I mean, he actually, even though he did not produce a ton of fantasy production for you, I think he really only finished with like 9 points PPR or something like that. But like the thing with Najee though is that bell cow status is there. Like Jalen Warren and Cordarrelle Patterson were getting in the game as some passing options, sure, but like they were not getting a majority of these carries. That is mostly what's happening with Najee Harris, who's looking like the guy. And then you've got Bijan Robinson sitting there. He's got what did his stats were pretty massive, 17 carries as well. Can you pull up Bijan Robinson's stats so we can get everybody like clued in on what exactly his production was? So the thing that I want to talk about is kind of breaking down this game really for the running backs and kind of what you're seeing, especially in that Pittsburgh backfield with Arthur Smith and the split between Najee, Jalen Warren, C-Pat. Like, what's that going to look like going forward? Do you see Najee continuing that bell cow role?
I definitely think so. I think it's one of those things of, Najee was that. Then Arthur Smith came in and then tried to not make him that. And now I think there's a little bit of a ship being corrected of, no, this is who Najee Harris is. There are some running backs that need 15 to 20 carries to get warmed up and to get into a game. There's some running backs that I can't just be in for 8 to 10. For the rushing stats, you were saying Najee Harris, 20 carries, 70 yards, average of 3.5 yards per carry. Najee Harris also had a catch for 10 yards. Bijan Robinson was 18 carries, 68 yards. He also had 5 catches for 43 yards. So that's over 100 yards total for the day, but still no touchdown for him. I think that's the one thing that as a Bijan owner, depending if this is a league you've been in for a while, if this is a first-year dynasty, you definitely paid a premium for Bijan Robinson. You need touchdowns from him. Period.
You do need the touchdowns, but at the same time, he's also making up for that a lot of the time for you in the receiving game. Whereas Najee Harris is not really getting you anything in that category, and that's contributing to what's kind of depressing his output. Bijan is giving you that on a weekly basis. He's giving you that receiving upside, and you saw that in this game, right? 5 receptions for 50 yards. Roughly, didn't you say for 46?
Yeah,
so
43.
Even though he didn't get the touchdown, he's still producing for you in PPR situations, and he's still putting up good numbers for you. And the other thing that you said about this also that I think is worth mentioning is that Pittsburgh has a really stout defense, and they make it really tough on you to score. So I do think that based on the usage we saw from Bijan and the fact that they actually finally just made him that dominating bell cow of their offense, I do think the touchdowns are going to go up. You're going to see as Atlanta gets into games where they're playing Carolina, right? Who they play twice a year. When they go up against a team like that, I think Bijan Robinson is going to have bigger days when he's not playing one of the tougher matchups.
23 touches for Bijan Robinson compared to 3 for Algier. That's the main takeaway as a Bijan owner that you're like, thank God, because that number was usually even last year. To sit there and go it's almost like he's getting a 10th, Algier getting a 10th of what Bijan's getting. Your volume share is now there. Now it needs to become is it going to be consistent?
Now, speaking of a guy that's been surprisingly consistent, we're going to move on to our next game. And this is going to be the shocker, right? Because we got a win from the New England Patriots, who are heavily favored to have the number 1 pick at the end of this year over the much favorited Cincinnati Bengals. Now, we saw Joe Burrow continue his history of sluggish starts in fantasy. Jamar Chase was really, struggling to get going. We did see Zach Moss get 9 carries, 44 yards, a touchdown, and kind of give you some flex value, which is good. You want to see that out of Zach Moss in his new role in Cincy. But the star of this day was Ramondre Stevenson for the New England Patriots, who's 25 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. Essentially just tells you this guy is the New England Patriots offense right now, and
Yeah.
he is going to get a ton of work. Ramondre Stevenson just got that second contract from New England, right? So they're invested in him for like the next 4 years or so. With that contract, what are you thinking?
No, that was literally what I was just about to look up, is where's that contract sitting? Because that's what I want to know, is if I'm paying a first round or a high second plus, like, I need to know he's there. I need to know he's there for the long haul, because there's sometimes where you might sit there and think, oh, this age, this performance, he's going to be here for a while. It's like, yeah, but how much of that is the system and the team around him? And you have to factor in, can he stay there with that team? And quarterback's favorite friend is a good run game, and that's just going to increase once Drake May's there. So you have to factor in, how is this going to change with Drake May once he takes over the reins too. So yeah, knowing
I
a
think
little
it's
bit of
just
that
going to be a
contract.
run-centric offense, right? I mean, like you're not just throwing the ball all over the field with Jacoby Brissett. And when Drake May comes in, I mean, he's raw, right? They're going to lean on Ramondre, like you said. I wanted to come in here with your with the numbers for Ramondre. He's got a 4-year, $36 million contract
Yep.
that he signed this year. And then you're now seeing the team back that up with the 25 carries. We did see them bring in Antonio Gibson, but Gibson didn't really factor in much. It was the Ramondre show.
Yeah. And to think, just from like a retrospective standpoint, think of where we were about 2 years ago with Antonio Gibson and then Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre Stevenson, oh, this guy's producing, but like, he's kind of, if you got him, you're happy, but you're not going after him. And like how Antonio Gibson was like first round pick. Oh my God, you got to get this guy on your team. And now it's like he's the backup now. Like, this is the
Yeah.
Ramondre Stevenson show. So a good example of kind of how the temperature can change very, very fast in Dynasty.
Speaking of first round rookie picks, are going to talk about somebody who was overwhelmingly the favorite rookie pick. Now, he played in a game with the Arizona Cardinals as a member of the Arizona Cardinals against the Buffalo Bills. And we are talking about one Marvin Harrison Jr., who turned in an absolute dud in the Cardinals' loss to the Bills. The Bills came out on top 34-28. So, Bobby, can you break down this performance by Marvin Harrison Jr.? And if you are somebody who invested that 101 in him, obviously you're not turning around and trading him right now, but how are you feeling? And how does that kind of affect what you do with him in your lineup as the season progresses?
Well, I feel like depending on your lineup, he shouldn't have been starting to begin with, because he's still a rookie. You don't know the situation. They are playing a decent Buffalo Bills team, but I think when you pay 101 and you're not expecting 101 to be that stat line, one catch for like a yard. That's not what you're paying for with that pick. So,
I mean, consider some of the trades we saw. You saw people like sending like 3 first round picks to get the rights to draft them. So, I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, it's just people are making these massive investments.
yeah, he was definitely like in a draft that I didn't feel like there was a clear 101. There's a lot of people that thought he was the clear 101 and spent on him like he was the clear 101. And what's crazy to me is there's a part of me that's wondering if a lot of this off the field stuff. So we're seeing it a little bit in college football of how player development has just, it's all over the place with NIL. this is something where I'm like, how much of this offseason thing with Fanatics and not wanting to sign his player licensing agreement, if I recall correctly, there's still like litigation going on around that. Like, how much is that playing a role right now of where is your head at? Your head's over here and not in the game.
There's definitely an aspect of that is a little concerning. I mean, if I'm the dynasty owner, I'm not, like I said, I'm not hitting the panic button just yet, but I do believe that something that I've seen and I've heard players say, well, time and time again, is your head has to be in the right place to succeed in the NFL. This is not a game where you just walk in and you're the best. You really have to dedicate yourself to your success. And one of the things that we saw over this offseason is a lot of Marvin Harrison Jr. thinks he's too good for the process. He's too good to work out. He's too good to sign his NFLPA contract when no other player is doing that. He thinks he's special. It's very clear in every decision that he makes. And why wouldn't he? He's been told he's special since the day he was born. He's the son of one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. He is a physical freak. He went to Ohio State. He played at one of the premier college football programs where he's dominating Big Ten competition, right? It's always been easy for him. It's been handed to him since the day he was born. So the question is now that real life is smacking him in the face, is he going to be able to step up? It's not like the Cardinals were the Falcons, right? Where they're going up against the Steelers and they're only putting up 10 points. It's kind of more of the Chris Olave situation where they're putting up 47 points and he's not involved. The Cardinals put up 28 points in this game. Marvin Harrison, by all accounts, should have been more targeted in this game. So, like you said, in your lineup leagues, let's say you were starting him and you were counting on him. Are you going away from him or are you counting on a bounce back?
You have to sit him. You have to sit him because you can't have empty possessions in a thing. And if it's still the relationship with him and Kyler is not there, like you cannot risk it. You cannot risk it. If you got someone that's at least got a higher floor that you can rely on, you got to go with him. Because I think one of the things that scares me the most with this Marvin Harrison, Kyler Murray situation is how is he going to react where the viral clip of him just waving his arms around is going to get in his head of, yeah, it's not me. Kyler's not finding me. How much is that going to play into this? And like that's what you have to worry about. Is it going to be like they're just not giving me the ball? Like that how much is that going to factor in?
You know, there's another thing that now that you say that, I'm thinking back to like Cliff Kingsbury, right? And some of the reactions Kyler Murray would have to him, like in games, and you could just like see Kyler Murray telling him to just shut the F up on national television. It's like, Kyler probably doesn't respond well to guys coming at him. So if Marvin Harrison Jr. starts doing that, I do actually, wonder how much that quarterback to receiver relationship kind of plays into his success or failure. Because, it's obvious like there's an ego on this guy and there's an ego on Kyler. And that doesn't always play nicely together. You know what I'm saying? So it's really going to be interesting, I do think, like you said, to see how that relationship develops and repairs or fractures completely, depending on, how things shake out with them. We didn't really talk about Josh Allen, but we should just mention, hey, the guy balled out. He had 4 total touchdowns. You also got good games out of James Conner. He had a great day. 80 total yards and a total touchdown. And James Cook did get, unfortunately sniped by Josh Allen on the goal line and things like that. And that is a concern that you are going to have if you're starting James Cook is that touchdown upside going to be there? Because Josh Allen is going to snake those. But we are going to move on to another really, really productive running back, Joe Mixon. Speaking of new running backs in new situations, walks into the Houston Texans and absolutely dominates carries, 30 carries, 159 yards and a touchdown, one of the most productive running backs on the day. We're going to be actually covering a lot of fantasy assets in this game because there's a lot to unpack here. We saw this quarterback matchup. We saw Joe Mixon. We saw the receivers. We're going to break down Joe Mixon first. Joe Mixon, huge day in terms of volume. One of the things that we saw from him in Cincinnati was also he was a volume monster. And walking into this Texans situation, we had Dameon Pierce, who could have potentially been kind of like an alternate to him. But Joe Mixon really, really was the featured guy. And this is kind of a Kyle Shanahan-based offense. And what that means is that running back is going to be a feature and focal point of that offense, usually involving a bell cow. We've seen that with all the Shanahan derivatives, right? It's like Kyron Williams is like the guy in LA. San Fran has Christian McCaffrey, and they're always trying to like lean on like that guy. Bijan has that too, right? So like, I guess the question is Joe Mixon worth the first two, even though he's a second contract running back? He's a little older, but God, that volume is enticing. It's massive.
The enticing thing is that volume in a pass first offense. Like that offense goes through CJ Stroud. It's going through CJ Stroud. It's going through Nico Collins. It's going through Stephon Diggs.
Let me hit you with this though. We call that a passing based offense. Sure. 32 passes, but also 30 rushes. There's some balance to this thing.
Yeah. No, but that's what I'm saying is it's a well-oiled machine. And that's where it's like he's not getting 30 carries because the quarterback's only throwing it 15 times. He's getting 30 carries and they're throwing it 30, 40 times too. Because, yes, there's 32 attempts, but there's probably sacks involved. There's more passing attempts that were actually called. So that's where I'm sitting there and liking that as an owner of Joe Mixon or as a potential buyer for Joe Mixon. You got to love that volume in that type of system. Because the thing is when that passing offense, hey, we get a 2-3 score lead, that rushing number is only going to go up. That was that balanced run in a tight game. Let's say Houston was up 2 scores, Joe Mixon would have had even more carries. So that's something you really have to factor in when it comes to those situations. As for the quarterback play, I think that was the thing I kept watching in that game that was a game of 2 young quarterbacks. Where as we sat here and talked about bad young quarterback play, that was a game of good young quarterback play. Like, it will be fun if this is going to be a matchup we're going to see for years to come. Anthony Richardson versus CJ Stroud. Anthony still has some of those Anthony moments of just he's still not the 100% accurate, but then he makes this insane play and it's like, this is why you were a first round pick. This is why you're here. This is why you're getting these opportunities, because you can make that play.
It's all about experience. You and I said this, coming into his career in the NFL. Full disclosure, Bobby and I are both UF graduates. Bobby used to work for the UF Florida program for UF Florida, the University of Florida football program for many, many years. Under the Urban Meyer days, to the Will Muschamp, to the McElwain era. He's seen a lot of quarterbacks come and go. And one of the things that we saw in Anthony Richardson's game and just the backstory behind Richardson is you got to remember, this guy's got 17 starts, period, between college, high school, even, and pro, right? I'm not sure if that stretches back to high school or if he has more starts in high school, but the guy has not played a ton of football. One of the things that we have always also talked about is about how success at quarterback really comes from experience and reps and knowing what to do and what not to do on the field. Anthony Richardson doesn't have a lot of that. And if he were not paired with a coach like Shane Steichen, I probably would be completely out on him at succeeding in the NFL, because of the fact that the dude played like one season at Florida in which he was really shaky. Like, you didn't watch Anthony Richardson going, my God, that is a surefire first round dude in the NFL. It was really more like Anthony Richardson might be at the fringe of the first round. And then he had the combine where it was like, this guy's Hercules, and it's like,
Yeah,
go on.
no, there's I again, it's the roller coaster of Anthony Richardson because like how you're saying, there were games where it's like, I don't. The Utah game, he looked like an NFL quarterback. The Tennessee game, he looked like an NFL quarterback. The Kentucky game, he looked like he didn't belong anywhere in college football. Like that's the roller coaster of Anthony Richardson, and like you're saying, it's the experience, it's the reps, like it just needs to get there. And I think maybe it'll be the jury might be out on it, but I'm wondering if that injured rookie season is going to help him because you didn't have to go out there and get like lit up and your ego boosted. You got to really sit there and spend a year learning an NFL offense, like going through the mental. He got mental reps that year one. We've heard Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, so many of those quarterbacks talk about, man, that first year you just need to just be a sponge and soak up information. And I'm wondering if that injury year might have helped his development because he's not having to be out there. He can just sit there and soak it in like a sponge. And while this game was like not, it's nowhere near like a game like Josh Allen had or Baker Mayfield had this year, but that game this week is definitely like, as an Anthony Richardson owner, as an Anthony Richardson fan, that is the type of game you liked seeing in his development.
Absolutely. One thing I think that's really important to talk about too with Anthony Richardson as you're kind of trying to project his future going forward. The one thing that, you kind of alluded to is that importance of being that sponge, right? One thing that we know from being like kind of close to people around Anthony Richardson is that he is capable of doing that. I know we kind of got to move on. So we are going to talk a little bit just about our next few games to make sure we get through this full slate before we got to get out of here today. But we are going to talk next about some of the performances of the running backs in the Jacksonville and Miami game. We saw in this game actually a very interesting usage between Trevor Etienne and Tank Bigsby. Bobby, why don't you break down that game for us real quick and kind of tell us what you think about the Miami Dolphins and Jacksonville Jaguars running back situations. By the way, wanted to mention real quick, the Dolphins did manage a just barely victory there with 20-17 and came out on top. But let's talk about those Jags running backs and then we'll get into some of those Dolphins assets as well.
Tank Bigsby has been getting hyped up a little bit, kind of like a little bit dating back to his rookie year, and then definitely this offseason of like, hey, we messed up and we need to give Tank Bigsby more rushes. And that was done this week. They literally split carries. They both had 12. ETN had the touchdown, but if I recall, Tank Bigsby had more yards. So it is going to be interesting as we've discussed, the bell cow back, and that there's a lot of people that have invested in ETN being that bell cow back, and how that could be vanishing quickly is going to be a concern to some owners. But, hey, there's people like, I sold Bigsby over the offseason because I was kind of like, hey, with this hype, there's a lot of people hyping up a guy that really did nothing his rookie year. I'm just going to sell it now as an inflated asset. And, he's actually showing up a little bit. So you can do well by the offseason hype, and then sometimes you can get burned by the offseason hype.
Speaking of people that had brilliant days and just, you were talking about established themselves, this is your time to take a victory lap for your man, Baker Mayfield. Say it with me, Baker Mayfield, 24 of 30 for 289 yards, 4 touchdowns in a 37-20 win over the Washington Commies. Why don't you take me through your breakdown of the Tampa Bay passing game, which dominated?
No, that not just the passing game, just the offense in general. For the last 2 years, it's been really frustrating seeing how we cannot get a rushing games going. And to see that we were able to get a rushing game established, while granted not super dominant, but established with Bucky Irving and Rashad White, and being able to actually get, I would assume we were close to 5 yards to carry. Every time I was watching us run the ball, we were getting 4 or 5 yards. So that's why I'm assuming it's there. Pairing it with that explosive run that Bucky had a little bit later on. But having that run game established is helping Baker, because now the passing lanes are much more open. He's got more weapons this year, like with Jalen McMillan, like Trey Palmer in his second year now, Mike Evans still being Mike Evans, Chris Godwin back into his spot that he was in the slot. It's my big takeaway from that performance is how much of Baker's success last year was Dave Canales and how much of it is Baker now. Because what I'm seeing now is Baker's first game without Dave Canales. He's 24-30, nearly 300 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Dave Canales goes over to Bryce Young, and Bryce Young has one of his worst days. So that's where I'm trying to see, like, are we going to get an even bigger year from Baker? Like, is this going to be the norm from Baker Mayfield? We're going to have a test coming up because we're heading to Detroit. So it'll be interesting to see how that passing game, they did a decent job of shutting down McVay. And, we are pretty much a McVay system with Liam Cohen. So it'll be interesting to see if the next true test, if he does well next week, that is a guy where it's like, if you have not bought Baker, you might need to be buying Baker.
I got Baker in a trade in a 3rd round pick last year. I'm probably thinking you could probably get him for a second in a single quarterback league. In a super flex league, you're talking about a completely different valuation. But that is definitely a guy that I would be thinking about getting, because, he is dominating down there and he is tied to that team. On a longer term contract now. So the other thing that I think that was kind of interesting about the Bucs performance beyond that too, and I'm just going to make this point really quick and we'll talk about our next guy, is also how Baker was able to support all of these different pass game assets like Mike Evans. Chris Godwin had huge days, but you also saw Jalen McMillan get his, and he could have had an even bigger day. And you're talking about games where you're getting like the kind of output you got from Malik Neighbors. You're talking about the kind of output you got from, Marvin Harrison Jr. And then you're talking about Jalen McMillan suddenly, he's suddenly putting touchdowns on the board in week 1 and delivering immediate results when you were probably not even looking at him until round 3, and I think that just goes to show you the rookie thing. It can be a little bit of a crapshoot. And there's always going to be those guys that kind of come out of the woodwork and are the productive guys, where the guys that we were valuing really highly turn out to be nothing. Jaden Daniels, the man himself coming out. He was the 2nd overall quarterback taken by the Washington Commies, and he had quite a debut. Very interesting. Only 184 passing yards, but he had 88 rush yards for 2 touchdowns. So Jaden Daniels was a much, 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 much higher producer in fantasy football than Caleb Williams. Kind of talk about the difference between those 2 debuts and kind of what you're doing with those 2 quarterbacks in your dynasty leagues where you have or don't have.
Jaden Daniels is definitely the better debut. Granted, he still did not have a passing touchdown, but again, that's it's going to happen. The Bucs defense is also pretty good. I think the one worry is that he couldn't get a passing touchdown when we were down 3 DBs. Like, there was a weakness there that he could have exploited. But it's also like Terry McLaurin was like not too much of a factor. I think that's going to be something I think week 2, they're really going to sit there as an organization and go, hey, we need to get him better passing, and we need to find a way to give him he can get the ball to Terry McLaurin. So that's only gonna get better over time. But his game reminded me a lot of Lamar. Of he's got that speed of, hey, if they're just gonna drop back in zone and nothing's there, I'm just gonna tuck it and I'm gonna get 10, 15 yards. I mean, there were so many third and longs of like, yeah, we have everybody covered, but he's so fast and athletic where he just goes around the end and he's just going to pick up 10, 15 yards and get you the first down. And that's the game that he's going to be able to do if he can stay healthy and stuff. He'll be able, because that's another thing that's not on the stat sheet, is he needs to learn how to buckle his helmet on. He got hit barely twice and his helmet came off twice that game. Like, this isn't college. They're going to hit harder. Like, you can't just like have your helmet on like a hat, because what's going to happen is he's going to get hit one time and that he's going to be exposed. He's going to get a concussion. He needs to protect himself. And that is the only worry I'm having out of that game is not performance or anything like that. He needs to learn to protect himself.
That is definitely a thing. I mean, we saw him have that issue in college, right? In fact, I seem to remember there was some video I was watching where somebody like literally took Jaden Daniels like getting jacked up highlight reel and then put like Looney Tunes music to it or something like that. It was hilarious watching. I mean, it was just like this guy would get absolutely rocked. And it's like, how are you going to, minimize the danger to yourself when, the NFL, they're going to rock you even harder than that. I mean, you don't last long playing like that in this league. And so, you are maybe as a fantasy owner, maybe a little concerned that, hey, maybe you might want to go get Sam Darnold to back up Jaden because he might spend some time on the IR, huh? Okay. Speaking of some guys who spent some time on the IR, we had a great day from a guy who has spent a lot of time in the medical room, and that is J.K. Dobbins, or as I used to call him, J.K. I'm injured. He got 10 carries, 135 yards, and a touchdown. What are you doing with JK? Are you going out and are you rushing out and just trying to send an offer out right now?
I have been the Diamond Hands J.K. Dobbins owner. I've drafted him. He's sat on my team this entire time. Every year I sit there and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put him in RB2. And in that first week and he tears up and I'm like, yes, this is why I've been so good at holding on to him. And then he gets hurt and then he sits on my IR for the rest of the year. And then I did the mistake of not playing him this year because I'm like, oh, it's new system. He's coming off multiple injuries. It might be done. I was still, and then he goes 10 carries, 135 yards, touchdown. Hands down, one of the best parts of that Chargers offense. I might be sitting there going, sell. Like, hey, I'm open for business. Like, I thought I was just sitting here holding on to him. He's just at best a depth piece. Now I'm sitting here going like, hey, this might be my last chance. I've had so many times to finally get rid of him, but he's just not worth it because he gets hurt. If you want him, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be excited to get rid of him.
That is actually a great point. I mean, if you are somebody who needs some running back help on your team, go call up the Dobbins owner who's been probably frustrated by the years of injuries. It's almost like the Rashad Penny owners, right? It was always like, when he gets on the field, like it's going to be lights. It's just going to be lights out. He's the man. And when he gets on the field, he's so productive, but just the time that he's spending on the field is so far outweighed by the time that he's, kind of on IR. And so, I do understand kind of even when you're seeing this game, you're not thinking, man, I got Jim Harbaugh's RB1. You're thinking, well, it's only a matter of time before his ACL and MCL get torn up in week 3. So I need to get out now. And then, so if you are just willing to take that risk, then go call up the Dobbins owner because they're probably eager to make a move like Bobby is. we're going to go ahead and just kind of move on from that game. We did also in that game, just FYI, see a little bit of life also out of Lad McConkey. That's a guy I'm going to take a little victory lap on, even though I didn't manage to get him in any of my leagues just due to value, but I was really, really excited about his prospects, especially just due to the volume he may earn early on, just lacking receivers in that receiving core in LA. Now we're going to move on to another team in the AFC West here. We saw the Denver Broncos take on the Seattle Seahawks. And in this game, we got a lot of revealing fantasy information. We did see the Seahawks come out on top 26-20, but we got a lot of answers, I think, about kind of Kenneth Walker, how he was going to look in this new offense. We got a lot of answers, not so great about the Seattle receiving core and how they're going to do. And on top of that, the Denver offense with Bo Nix, we saw that really struggle. Although, Nix was able to get a rushing touchdown to help himself out. But let's go through some of these assets here in this game. Let's say you are the Seattle, let's say you're the Lockett owner, you're the Metcalf owner, you're the Njigba owner. Let's just go through these three guys. What are you doing with each of them?
JSN, you have to be listening to offers. You have to be listening to offers, because if someone wants to come, this might be your best price now, because it's just, like I was saying earlier, it's those second-year players that are still not doing stuff that concern me the most. Because then that says it's either it's an effort thing, it's a mentality thing, it's a fit thing, it's something. And it's not clicking. That's what worries me the most.
It's not clicking, and it's now two offensive coordinators.
Yeah. It's not, yeah. So that's the thing that JSN would probably be the biggest worry. Lockett, at the end of the day, Lockett's always been this. I had Lockett previously. He was actually a factor in a Le'Veon Bell trade that I did a long time ago. He was one of the stars of our team very early on because he was an underrated. He just got the job done. He was never going to blow it up. He just got the job done. He got what you needed. And it's just, he's always been undervalued. So I think going into that with Tyler Lockett, he is always undervalued. And so that's what you have to worry about a little bit of what you're going to be getting from other people. The offers you might be receiving for Tyler Lockett are not going to be what he's worth to your team. I'll give you a mid to late second for Tyler Lockett. And you might just be sitting there going he's worth more to this team than that pick. Now,
it's all about your circumstance, right? Rebuild versus I'm competing.
Yeah. So that would be definitely the thing. It's if you're sitting there, you've got a lot of assets that are depreciating, you've had a rough start or something like that, and you're really ready to start going rebuild and stuff, then yeah, just get what you can. But, I just feel like he's always undervalued, and he's going to be worth more to your team than he's actually going to get draft-wise.
JSN, we've seen an entire season of this now where he has been unable to ascend in that receiving core. Part of that, though, is, again, you're up against productive veterans like Tyler Lockett, and you're up against DK Metcalf. And I think a lot of people always knew Jackson Smith-Njigba, if you're drafting him, you're waiting a little bit. But are you waiting or are you selling, right?
Yeah, I think that's just the thing. I was just actually pulling up his stats last year. Just barely over 600 yards receiving, only 4 touchdowns last year. And then now yesterday, 2 catches for 19 yards. It's just we were just talking a couple of minutes ago about how Jaden McMillan could sit there and get a touchdown being wide receiver 4. A wide receiver 4 in that offense. Why can't JSN do the exact same thing in Seattle? Why does it seem it's a wide receiver 3, that's a struggle? There's other wide receiver 3s and 4s that can produce.
Well, I think a lot of it you're going to chalk up to Geno Smith, right? But then I'm also looking at a player like we talked about Drake London earlier, and the whole just dominant theory around Drake London is it's just add quarterback, just add quarterback, just get him a quarterback and it's going to be fine. Terry McLaurin, it's just add a quarterback and it's going to be fine. Well, it isn't fine. It isn't fine for these owners. Okay, if you're sitting there, Drake London, you're just sitting there looking at it just like, what the hell, man? And if you're Jackson Smith and Jigba's owner, you're looking at it just like, dude, at some point we got to see it. And so I guess the question is are you thinking, okay, DK is going to benefit when they get, Shedeur Sanders or what, whoever, Quinn Ewers or whoever you stick in this offense now? Like, is it going to be a thing where like you're waiting for that guy to arrive, or are you just like, no, I am just going to try to get what I can now. I'm going to try to get the flexibility.
Depending on how long you're waiting, the whole wide receiver core changes. I'm not going to go get into contracts and all that stuff right now because I'd have to look them all up. But like that receiving core could be completely different in 3 years. Now it could be into the benefit of like, hey, maybe they let DK go, Tyler Lockett retires, and now JSN's the one in this system. Could be, but there's just so many factors. You just have, if you commit, you have to commit. And if you're wavering, you got to get out now.
Next game we got to talk about, though, involves one of my favorite struggling quarterbacks to talk about, just because I'm just going to be real with you. I don't like him very much. His name's Deshaun Watson, and he plays for the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns got absolutely destroyed yesterday by the Dallas Cowboys. Not even close to a game, right? They got beat 33-17. But that score is making it look a little more respectable than it really was. Deshaun Watson was absolutely god-awful. They've guaranteed his contract, basically. I think he's still guaranteed for the next 3 years at absolutely insane prices. I mean, if you are an owner of Browns stock, first of all, if you're the Deshaun owner, I don't know what you're doing. And I mean, like, I don't know what you're doing if you still have him on your fantasy team. I don't know what you're doing. If you are the Nick Chubb owner, you're probably going to be expecting to see quite a few more stacked boxes. I mean, the Chubb days may be over. Jerome Ford looked decent. Again, we saw Amari Cooper got involved in the targets. We did see Jerry Jeudy make it into the end zone. But let's break down this game a little bit more. I mean, we saw Dak Prescott, 19 of 32, 179 yards and a touchdown, only just mere hours after becoming one of the highest paid players in the NFL. Now he definitely acquitted himself well with that win, and getting that result for that team. But if you're like the Amari Cooper owner, for example, right, and you see this kind of performance out of Deshaun Watson, or you see David Njoku go down with an injury, and now you've got like how are you playing this? Are you kind of holding on to Cooper, just saying, all right, Watson's got to throw to somebody, and he's going to light up Amari?
Let's say they move on from Deshaun Watson. Jameis is there. And we know Jameis can sit there and produce and feed wide receivers. So I'm not too worried about Amari. He's got two quarterbacks that can get him the ball.
Well, now, I mean, we didn't really see Amari Cooper get a ton of work yesterday. We really only saw him get 2 catches, for 16 yards. So it's not like he was really producing for you, but it's more like, do you see him being one of the guys who kind of positively regresses to the mean next week, where that work kind of increases?
Yeah. I'm not too worried about him. Again, this is the Dallas defense. The Dallas defense looked really good. I think this is a mix of a good Dallas defense versus a bad Deshaun Watson. I think that's a little bit of what's going on here. We will see what they're going to do, if they're going to pull the plug on him at some point. I think at the end of the day, they're just going to keep, we just saw Denver not that long ago eat all this money to get rid of Deshaun Watson. I think we're about to get to that. To get rid of Russell Wilson. I think we're about to get to that point with Deshaun Watson. I think it's just We need to cut this Band-Aid. We need to move forward. He's doing nothing but hurting this team. So.
Right. Moving on to our last game. This was truly the grandpa's revenge game where we kind of talked a little bit about kind of some of the struggles of rookies and some of the like great games from veterans. And this is definitely one where we saw that really happen. Now, this effort that I'm about to describe happened in a defeat. Okay. Los Angeles Rams were defeated by the Detroit Lions 26-20 in an overtime game last night. But in that game, Cooper Kupp, holy heck, Cooper Kupp, 21 targets, 14 receptions, over 100 yards and a touchdown. That was vintage. I mean, that's what that's what you were expecting from Cooper Kupp like last year, coming off of, all of the 2021 hype and everything like that. That's what we've been waiting for this day from Cooper Kupp for like a couple years now.
Mm-hmm. No, it was like he was definitely getting fed. We do need to put a little bit of stuff of with Puka getting hurt. This probably definitely inflated his numbers late. But yes, those numbers were there when Puka was still in the game. That first drive, it was a 4-1, like Cooper Kupp, Puka split ratio.
I think I was looking at it at one point in the game just before Puka got hurt, and it was like 6-1 in terms of the targets. And this was with Puka like healthy. And that is a little concerning to you if you are somebody who got Puka at the price this year. If you are the person like me who was genius enough to draft that guy in your rookie draft last year, and you just held on, well, you can afford a day like that from Puka because you didn't really invest that much. But if you're somebody that bought all of the hype, I mean, why wouldn't there be hype? The guy walked onto the field day one in his rookie debut and got 15 targets, right? Like, it's like, you're looking at this guy like this is Sean McVay's like number one for the foreseeable future. But the wrench in that machine is Cooper Kupp and Cooper Kupp's rapport with Matthew Stafford, right? And that is, I think, one of the things that drove a lot of the concern around Puka Nacua, even as he was having this really ascendant season, was like, how are these guys going to coexist? Because they essentially are like a lot of the same kind of guy. And they kind of attract when one of them is not on the field, they're the target hog and they play this huge role. And then the thing though is, and this is something you've heard like Steve Smith Sr. talk about, like on his Cut to It podcast, is like, he knows Matthew Stafford, just the way he thinks as a quarterback is he locks in on one guy. And that's like the way he plays football is like in a game, there's one guy that he's looking for because that's his best matchup throughout that game. And so when it's Puka, he's going to be the guy. And when it's Kupp, it's going to be him, right? And this is that concern is how much are they going to take away from each other? And we kind of saw that with Puka Nacua a little bit. He only finished with 4 catches for 35 yards before he had to exit with that injury. And that meant that Cooper Kupp became that player, and he was ridiculous. So I will say there is another player who kind of had an interesting day. Now, most of it was powered by like one really big play, I will say, but Tyler Johnson had 5 receptions for 79 yards. Now, Bobby, you're a little bit of a Bucs guy, so you can tell us a little bit about Tyler Johnson, but is this a guy that maybe you should be looking at your waiver wire to maybe get on your team?
Yes, no, definitely. I think Tyler Johnson, it really depends. I mean, at the end of the day, depending on if Puka's serious, Cooper Kupp is still an injury-prone player. So even if Puka's not long-term thing, it still might not be a bad stash idea to have Tyler Johnson. A lot of Tyler Johnson's situation has been just, he's always been that guy that's kind of on the roster bubble. He's good enough. But it's just, that's what happened with him in Tampa. He was drafted for us. He had a lot of promise. He was a good receiver. The issue just became as he was wide receiver 4 or 5 on this Super Bowl team, he doesn't play special teams. And if you're not going to play special teams, you have to play as a wide receiver. And the Bucks let him go so we could make room for Julio Jones. So
That
that's
seems
just
like a
been
great move.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely short-sighted, but that's just been, it's not that he can't play, it's just he is only a wide receiver. He's not really a special teams guy, but he's a good wide receiver, and that's where he gets in these situations of just being on the fringe. So being in LA where it's like, yeah, you are talented enough to be our wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. We've got enough guys that can play special teams. You can have a life here being just a wide receiver. He's not a bad stash. He's definitely got some talent. And being behind Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, who, we'll see what it is with Puka, but we always know Cooper Kupp's going to miss a game or two. He could really sit there and be a good bench piece for you.
I agree with that. I mean, if you're looking at that game, I mean, granted, like I said, 63 of this dude's yards came off of like a short pass that he took, way downfield. So it's not like he's getting a lot of like deep targets. And he only finished with 79 yards, but he did get 7 targets. And he's tied with Demarcus Robinson for second on the team in terms of targets. And with Puka Nacua, like we said, we're not really sure what his injury is at this time. So it's really hard to say what kind of injury we're dealing with and how long this is going to be the situation. But it's possible that Tyler Johnson begins to operate as the wide receiver 2 in this offense. And if he does, there is certainly fantasy value in being Sean McVay's wide receiver 2, catching passes from Matthew Stafford. So that is definitely a guy that I'm going to be looking for. Getting into some other target shares in this game, another one that I thought was really interesting was the lack of targets that you saw for Amon-Ra St. Brown, who just signed a massive extension with Detroit. Now, we saw him get actually 6 targets, so I shouldn't really say he got a lack of targets, but it's really a very uncharacteristic game from the Sun God. It's another Puka Nacua situation where if you got him at his original price when he was not very highly valued, you're probably tolerating this game from him. But if you are one of those guys who sent out the King's ransom trade for him, you're probably pretty upset. And valid. I mean, what we're seeing in some of these trades for Amon-Ra were similar to the kinds of trades you would see for somebody like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. He is now being talked about as that kind of elite dynasty receiver, and he's giving you, equal production. He's giving you worse production than you got from Demarcus Robinson, for example, in this game. And that's not what you want. Like, that is not what you're paying all of that for. And that's not what the Lions are paying for either. That right there is the reason I don't think that this is going to be a long-term trend. I do think this is part of, he gets factored out because of the fact that teams have extra time to prepare. And that's also another reason you saw Jameson Williams have such a huge day in this one. Now, he got a lot of design targets. I thought, and rushes and things like that. We saw him actually, oh no, he only got 1. I'm surprised. I could have sworn I saw him running more reverses than just 1 reverse. No, but he did get 5 receptions, 121 yards and a touchdown in this game. And he definitely served as the most productive Detroit Lions receiver. I don't know how much you're going to count on that split being that way going forward, but I will say that Jameson Williams is definitely somebody that I am looking out for on the trade block. Is there a frustrated owner that is ready to move on and sees the sell window? Is there somebody like that is thinking this is a fluke, whatever, we want to get out? Or is it going to be really difficult to acquire him because those owners have been waiting so long for Jameson Williams to deliver on the promise that he had coming out of college? Now, that said, we have got to get out of here because we have hit the time that some real life stuff has to come up. So we are going to get out of here today and wrap up the Sunday Big Show. I have been Alex Klausner, one of the hosts today. This is been Bobby Carney, delivering the insight and analysis that you can come to expect on the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. Now, one thing I got to get out of the way before we sign off here is this isn't an independent podcast. We currently are relying on zero advertising dollars and zero, anything except ourselves. What's up? We ain't got any help. This is a pull yourself up by the bootstraps American venture. Okay. So that said, if you would like to be one of the people who helps us pull our bootstraps up, please like, subscribe, follow, comment, engage with us on all the social media at Dynasty FF Show. You can also comment down here, like, subscribe, YouTube, all that good stuff. Like I said, I've been Alex. This has been Bobby. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this podcast, and we hope to see you out there in the future.
See ya.